The world fell to shit. A big ol' apocalyptic dump.
The dark, dystopian future is essentially the wild, wild west with a twist. Sometimes it's a fun twist, like everyone gets a car with a weapon of their own choosing, mounted on top, and you just gotta get out there and survive. As a subgenre within a subgenre, the Twisted Metal series has suddenly made a resurgence after 10 years of inactivity. This all started out with the bright idea of mixing legit 90s car simulators with the cartoonish go-kart violence of Mario Kart. Why was this PlayStation game series brought back all of a sudden, and what does media like this truly represent? Sony's was the leader of bringing home the driving simulator and made it not just something you could only experience in the arcade. It had the home console version of Gran Turismo, marketed as the driving simulator. But they also had games where the point was to use these realistic cars to do literally the opposite of what Gran Turismo was trying to do. And if you look at games like Destruction Derby, Twisted Metal, and maybe even Crash Team Racing, you can see that they're all inspired by the whole vehicular combat fantasy that traces back to 80s action movies, from the rise of the end of the world survival fantasy, but not the one that involves zombies, aliens, or climate change, the one that was human versus human. Food and gasoline are hard to come by, and everyone is reinforcing their cars to be their own personal tank. This car apocalypse thing is but a cheeky parody on a much more serious, dreading subject, the end of the world, something that has been written about in fiction since forever. You had stories like Noah's Ark and the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the world gets reset by a great flood. Then you had much more destructive end-of-the-world stories like Ragnarok. The dawn of the 20th century would bring the sci-fi novel War of the Worlds, which was adapted into a radio narration on Orson Welles' radio show in 1938. This would make headlines as people thought this sci-fi story was really happening. Imagine today someone saying something really crazy on a podcast and nobody listening knew that it was a joke, and it goes viral, or someone was filming and decided to make some fear-mongering crap for TikTok and it goes viral. It was kind of like that, only worse. Basically, society wasn't used to being pranked, and Orson Welles really had people believe a Martian invasion was happening. Pretty much since then, the possibility of an alien invasion has been in the back of everyone's minds and took form in all kinds of new sci-fi material through modern media. And with the fear of the unknown, space always seemed like a portal to Earth's demise, like there was also a fear of asteroids or a permanent block of sunlight that causes everything to ice over. World War II created a fear of nuclear war, a situation where all life, including water, just dies, and suddenly 5 billion people become 50,000, and it's every man for himself. Cold War era pop culture would use the fear of nuclear war and blend it with technological advancement and make some of the greatest works of fiction in modern history. And this idea still works to make good content even today. With technological advances, there was and still is a fear that all this technology we rely on turns against us or just stops working. Losing important resources or having those important resources become scarce seems to be a quick way to throw everything into a post-apocalyptic environment. The resource of oil becoming nearly exhausted would be a really big deal. The Mad Max series from 1979 to 1985 would show that hard to obtain fossil fuel would make it hard to get around, and there'd be energy shortages, and eventually a breakdown of law and order, which would lead to a breakdown in modern society and nuclear war. Post-war societal breakdown has been depicted in different ways, but with The Road Warrior, Beyond Thunderdome, and 2015's Fury Road, we were shown a post-apocalyptic dystopia, all dried up of resources, but still had just enough to allow people to optimize their clothes and vehicles for survival. A world where your weapon of choice and the size and speed of your truck was definitely a way to show just how chingon you were, however delusional or accurate that was. This Road Warrior Thunderdome world was a rough, chaotic, tough guy fantasy straight out of the 80s, when you had the good guy, the bad guy, and a few ugly guys in between, with a group of regular folks just trying to survive. You'll have yourself a new age western. The Road Warrior was an iconic piece of fiction and inspired many of today's most imaginative filmmakers. Pop culture itself would embrace the rough and tough lawlessness of it. It was very punk rock. This world's unique use of dangerous, custom-made vehicles would inspire a new slew of car-related video games during the rise of the 3D gaming console. It made perfect sense because racing cars are cool, but adding that element of customization changed the entire scope of what it was. It brought it to a whole new level, and then you add the element of weaponizing them with upgrades. The fun just never stops. I don't know where Nintendo got the idea for Mario Kart, but they had the right idea. Maybe they was thinking wacky races, but with shells and banana peels. But with the PlayStation being aimed more at older kids and adults, we got to see more realistic gaming, more sports games, more cinematic action-packed games, and more racing. This was the perfect time for a game like Twisted Metal to be created. Originally coming out in 1995, with the sequel coming out a year later, the concept was a demolition derby, where the last driver alive wins. You could pick the vehicle, the arena, and you had all types of weapons you could use to help destroy your opponents. Sounds fun, right? Well, the added twist in Twisted Metal is that the winner would get to make one wish, and the twisted host, the one granting these wishes through some sort of magic, would enact a monkey's paw sort of wish granting on the winner. So the whole thing had a twisted, dark humor vibe to it. And right out of the post-apocalyptic Mad Max handbook, the games featured creepy contenders like Sweet Tooth, Mr. Grimm, and Dollface. It was just a post-apocalyptic fun time. There were actually 4 Twisted Metal games originally, followed by Black and Black Online. Online console gaming was still new around this time in 2001. Vehicular combat games were always a fun time online. My first online console game was actually 2005's Jak X, a game by Naughty Dog, where they wanted to expand on the custom vehicle aspect of Jak 3, a game with a clear Mad Max inspiration. The most recent Twisted Metal game came out in 2012 for the PS3, but not without other attempts at continuing it that didn't go through. Around 2008, a Twisted Metal game to be set in a post-apocalyptic environment specifically was scrapped from development because another racing game called MotorStorm Apocalypse was just released directly by Sony. Also around 2008 was a Twisted Metal concept with a inner city street culture influence. The game's creator compared this idea to Rockstar's Midnight Club, so it would have been like Midnight Club with rocket launchers. These two very different concepts sound like they would have been a great way to revive the game series, but instead we got the 2012 self-titled game. However, while Sony didn't let the 2008 post-apocalyptic game go forward, they did have a Twisted Metal film get greenlit in 2012. But after 5 years of development hell, Sony would change their mind about it because they wasn't sure if it still had a strong fan base. Also, probably because there already was the Death Race movie series. Also, the Fast franchise was in full effect, and there was even the Mad Max Return with Fury Road. A Twisted Metal movie in the middle of all that would have just been embarrassing. The legacy of The Road Warrior and Thunderdome had seemingly already come full circle. These movies are proof that this car competition, life or death action scenario still works even if it's not in a post-apoc setting. You had Mad Max, the Mad Max ripoffs, and Fast and Furious. None of them were quite Twisted Metal though. Sony realized there was still an opening for a Twisted Metal adaptation. So in 2019, the chairman of Sony Pictures spoke about developing a TV adaptation for Twisted Metal. It would be a part of a new PlayStation division that would produce live-action projects based on their gaming IPs. So far, they've already produced the Uncharted movie and the season of The Last of Us. Also, a Gran Turismo film, which is about to release in theaters. By early 2021, it was confirmed to be going forward, and now, summer 2023, it's already out on NBC's streaming app, Peacock. Twisted Metal, the TV series, is a post-apocalyptic action comedy starring Anthony Mackie and Stephanie Beatriz from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I am giving it a watch currently, and it's really leaning into that comedy aspect. I'd say that by not taking it too seriously and making it a 10-episode thing, maybe they'd stand out from the other more serious action adventures that used cars to drive the story. But I'm glad they finally did something new with the IP. It's been a solid 10 years since the last game, and almost 30 in total since the first game. This concept with cars and guns in a dangerous world is so entertaining because it's really the Wild West. It's a derivative of the classic Western. You have the Wild West, which is the post-apoc future, you have bandits up to no good, and you have the heroes. Everyone more or less breaking the law to get what they want in the process. The Mad Max series was definitely like a new-aged Western. The Fast and Furious series kinda had this appeal too. And again, it's all aimed at kids and adults, mainly boys and men. Anyone who enjoys fast cars, big trucks, and violence. Twisted Metal, especially with the TV show, proves that the post-apoc action adventure doesn't have to be crazy expensive, and there can be an emphasis on just the absurdity of it all, making it kind of a parody of the Mad Max and Fast and Furious types. It reminds us that the post-apoc wasteland genre can have different looks. It can look like a whole planet made out of sand, or it could just be an abandoned city with an overgrowth of plants, or something in between. But while not easy to recreate, it's always been one of the more interesting subcultures of media, because however dark a post-apoc situation can be, it's still something that can be fun to pretend with in video games, and companies can still use it to sell merchandise, like all these different types of cars they can sell to young kids and model collectors alike. Even when compared to cowboys on horses in the Wild West, this post-apocalyptic genre has had a lot of potential, and Sony, with their Twisted Metal show, is just playing the field. Or rather, they're just playing the game of making a game real life, hoping it doesn't actually become real life. Well, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. Subscribe for more random, nostalgic topics like this, and I will see ya.